Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Megan Baerg and I am the co-creator of NeuroAcrobatics. I'm so excited today to have somebody joining me who I consider to be not just a friend, but a mentor, and that is Lisa Kusch. I'm so happy that you're here. Welcome. I would like to start by just having you introduce yourself.
Okay, thanks for the introduction, Megan, and thank you for having me here. It's fantastic to be here. Introducing myself, I am a prairie girl from Canada. I live in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and my career up to this point has been mostly in mental health services, starting out in education, moving into mental health services. And then over the last 7 years, I had some personal situations that brought me to my knees physically and mentally. And during my recovery, after being labeled disabled,
Mm.
I fell into, I will call this giant well of breath work and then breathing sciences. And during that time, I had amazing trainers. I spent 800 hours learning to be a breathwork facilitator at Power of Breath Institute. And then when I said enough times, but why does it work? I was referred to Dr. Peter Litchfield at the Graduate School of Behavioral Health Sciences. And I called him up and I said, hey, I want to know why breathwork works. And he said, it doesn't. You should come study with me. And I laughed. I'm like, no, actually, I'll come, but I'm coming to find out why it works. And so for the entire time that I studied there and finished my master's degree in applied breathing sciences, we had this little contention, this little bone of he was waiting for me to see the light of why breathwork doesn't work. And at the end of 4 years, we actually came to this really nice conclusion where we agreed to disagree because I had proven my points well enough that there are reasons why breathwork works, and there are reasons why we have to know the science to be able to do it ethically.
Right.
And that's really where I come from. So now in Saskatoon, I run Conspire Health. I'm the founder of Conspire Health. I'm specifically a breathing analysis oriented counseling, it's behavioral counseling clinic. And we meet people to explore the psychophysiology of their breathing. And in
Mm.
order to do that, we come into the science
Right.
first and take a look at how is their physiology hearing them? How is their
Mm.
physiology responding to maybe what they're consciously and unconsciously doing to control their bodily feelings, their breath, their muscles? There's so many layers, right? And in that, nothing is lost. Everything that I've done previously, including my midwifery practice, which I forgot to mention, we'll talk about that on another time. It's all comes into this work so specifically to understand respiration and the power of breathing, whether we are finding our way back to the first breath that was intended for us when
Mm.
we came out of the womb that brought us into this world, or if we're learning to intervene for specific outcomes.
Beautiful. I find the world of breath has become very nuanced. You know, there's so many different layers, there's so many different avenues that you can pursue in your own journey as well as facilitating. And so I'm wondering if you can just spend a few minutes and give a brief overview of what breathing behavior is, how you work as a breathing behavior analyst, and why that is so important for people who may not know.
Right. So explaining breathing as a behavior is as easy as saying, show me what you do when someone sneaks into a room and surprises you.
Okay.
Right. Now, is that a reflex? Being startled is a reflex. And then the breath hold has a physiological function. right? It's there. But when we've learned that one time from maybe something that was really important to be afraid of, like stepping out into the street and a car zooming by, and we go, and we back up,
Right.
right? That's a reflex. And at the same time, our brain registers, hey, that saved me. I need to be more vigilant. And so then the next day you might be on that same street and you push the button for the walk light, and you push the button and you turn around and you're waiting for the walk light and a car zooms by and you go and you do it again as a preemptive gasp in case you got hit by that car, but your foot's not even over the curb,
Mm.
right? So it becomes a predictive response. Predictive response is our behavior. That's not a reflex. And so we learn, our physiology learns, and our mind learns. And if we do enough times in a day, we will accidentally, but with good intention, dysregulate our respiratory system.
Hmm.
Because every single breath, and I don't think people really grasp this. Yes, everyone knows we need to breathe to stay alive, but do they know that every breath is really the key moderator in our pH, in balancing our body's acids?
Mm.
Do people understand that it's our breath, because of the pH interactions, that's in charge of our metabolism? And if we have behaviors where we put a breathing reflex into, we'll call it an approximation of a reflex. If we put that into our life, it can be gasps, it can be sighs, it can be big, deep breaths, it can be shallow breaths. If we put those into places where they're not reflexively required, we can be really derailing ourselves, because 70% of our body's detoxing at a cellular level happens with the exhale. Metabolites are supposed to come out of our breath.
Mm.
Now, what do they travel with and on, right? They travel with and on your CO2.
Right.
And in everything breathing, we're thinking we need enough oxygen. We need more oxygen. And most breathwork practices will tell you this will help you receive more oxygen. And sometimes it's to your brain, or sometimes it's to the muscles you're using. And that can only be true if you have enough CO2 in your body to meet the need. Right? And so as a breathing behavior analyst, I help people identify what is their CO2 level, and is it naturally present, and are they allowing it to be reflexive so that it keeps their pH balance, or have they developed habits where
Mm.
these little breathing habits have come in around the corners? They're predicting that it's keeping them safe in some way, and they have derailed the nervous system. Now, from a science point of view, it's like, okay, well, how would a person know if their breathing habit kind of was getting in the way? And it's really quite simply, there's so many symptoms, but so many people have low CO2 that we have become, as a society that just kind of normalizes certain symptoms,
Mm.
like brain fog after lunch. Like,
Right.
what if that wasn't a thing? What if that wasn't a response because of a situation, when it's not really a situation, it's a state called hypocapnia. And hypocapnia is the scientific word for low CO2 in your body and in your blood, that creates symptoms. And symptoms are really the outcome of deficits of oxygen delivery to different parts of your body.
I have two questions. The
Yeah.
first one, you've mentioned breathing and respiration. Is there a difference?
There is. We have internal respiration, cellular respiration. We can't control that, right? The delivery, breathing, is where our behaviors are. Breathing is using our muscles, our accessory muscles, getting that air up into hopefully through the nose, but not always, into the lungs. And then the gas exchange happens, and the oxygen's into the blood, and the CO2 and the metabolites are breathed out.
I
Once it's
think
in the blood, it's internal respiration. So breathing is external respiration. And once it's in the blood, we have internal respiration.
I just wanted to make that distinction because I think so often respiration is included in breathing. And so I think it's important to understand internal, external, and the cellular processes that you've mentioned. And this
Right.
leads me to my second question, which is why is carbon dioxide or CO2 so important?
Great question. So the CO2 becomes really important. And I'm going to give you the version that I use when I'm working in schools, when I'm explaining this to children, because it's just easier to catch the metaphor, right?
Yes.
So if we think of CO2 as the gatekeeper of the cell, meaning there's a lot of things that are going to happen. He's almost kind of like a concierge and a
Okay.
janitor. So CO2 is your concierge and your janitor of cellular respiration. And CO2 is built up in the body by the carbohydrates that we eat and other processes, but we make sure that they all get to the cells so that there's enough there to do what? CO2 is there to open the door. And when he opens the door, I call this little taxi cab that goes by hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is constantly flying by on fast-paced streets, and it has passengers. And the passengers that want to get to the cell is oxygen. So when CO2 gets to the door, carbon dioxide gets to the door, he hears the hemoglobin coming, opens the door and says, I see you, O2, and lets the oxygen in. The oxygen then comes in, and there's a whole series of social interactions inside the cell to create what we need: energy, right? And then secondary chemical reactions that help buffering acids. And if there's an overload in the cell and there's not enough carbon dioxide there to get the stuff out, then those metabolites, the garbage, the stuff that's supposed to go out with the breath, ends up going into the kidneys, into the lymph, or into the interstitial fluid, right? So if we don't have carbon dioxide, there's like nowhere to get rid of the trash, and it just gets pushed into the corners, and we hope that other systems take care of it.
Got
And
it.
that's the first round of where symptoms start to get created by hypocapnia. If we don't have enough CO2, then what happens to that oxygen? Those cabs, that hemoglobin's just going round and round and round the traffic circle, and the oxygen doesn't get offloaded.
Right.
So you could have a pulse oximeter on your finger, though everybody can get one at the drugstore these days, and it might tell you that you have 100% blood oxygenation. And who doesn't want 100% on a test? But in this situation, that's a bad outcome. If you have 100% blood oxygenation, that means it's not getting out of your blood
And
and
into the
into
cells.
your tissue. That's right.
Right.
So you're looking for, if you do that as your very own first test, it would be, where's my blood oxygenation when I'm just sitting still breathing? And it really should be varying as the blood rises and falls in oxygen content between 92 and 97%.
Right. Well, thank you. That provides some clarity. And I have so many more science driven questions that we're going to have to do just a whole video on the science because I want to pivot back to breathing behaviors specifically. And I'm interested because I feel like you're unique in that you don't just have breathing behavior, but you also have breathwork certification in what we consider to be traditional modern breathwork. And so I'm wondering, in your opinion, how do the two differ? Is there a difference between what we consider to be breathwork and what is considered to be breathing behavior?
Right. So the main difference between breath work and breathing behavior analysis and then addressing those habits is that one, the outcome, which is breathing behavior, is to regain self-regulation. The breathing reflexes, the way we were meant to breathe the way our physiology expects us to breathe so that we can thrive, right? And when we take on habits, little breathing habits, those can be dysregulating that reflexive breath to breath ability. Now, as I described, sometimes it's because we've had a scary experience and we've adopted a pattern. But what if that scary experience has now generalized so much that you can't even leave your house without gasping, and that you gasp a lot throughout the day? And you've been doing it for so long, you don't remember why you're doing it anymore. Then we need an intervention. And interventions like breath work help people change state to create a corrective experience. And so it's a volitional changing of your CO2, and where we actually go to very low levels of CO2 in the body, which I just spent a good deal of time explaining to you why you wouldn't want to do that. But we go really, really low. Why do we do that? Because when the CO2 is really low, the body can't afford our defense mechanisms. It just can't afford them. So it shows us what our defense mechanisms are. They come up loud and clear so that we have opportunities with really well-trained facilitation to meet those, notice what they're there for, whether or not we still need them, and work on it on a psychological level. And then when we come back to the other 23 hours of the day, then we need to learn, okay, I'm safe now from the breathing intervention. Now, how do I retrain my breathing so that all the places where it's generalized will now come back to reflex? And that's where we use biofeedback. So in breathing analysis, we use this little purple box, a cap no go, and we use other things as well, but this is my go-to for measuring CO2. And then we can actually see breath by breath where a person has subconsciously shifted their efforts and created a 24-hour-a-day feedback loop where the body is still prepared to not be safe. So in the interventions of breath work, we might deal with it on one level, but if we don't go back and look at the reflexes afterwards and restore the reflex, then the intervention is so limited.
Right, it's not sustainable.
Right. On its own, it cannot create really long-lasting change unless incidentally it also hit the one habit that's been derailing us. But most of the time we have numbers of habits, right? So the difference here is when we're working in breathing sciences and analysis, we're trying to bring people back to their natural breathing where they actually have the full amount of oxygen required in their prefrontal cortex all day long to be high-level creative thinkers and socially engaged people. When we're doing breath work, we're going into hypoxic states, basically to shake it up a bit and find out what's holding us back, right? And that's very different because it becomes a psychological pivot point, but doesn't always give us the physiological connection. In breathing behavior analysis, we're working with the psychophysiology together so that we don't miss the nuance.
I love that because at NeuroAcrobatics, one of our core principles is that psychology becomes physiology via pulmonology. And so what you think while you breathe affects and shows up in the body. You touched on it a few minutes ago, and I just want to bring up or ask another question, which is the connection, in your opinion, between psychology and breath. Because I know it's something that we've talked a lot about. One thing I didn't mention is how we met Lisa was through the professional school and a course in neuroacrobatics that Sage taught, who's our founder, that I assisted with. And so Lisa's very familiar with what we do at neuroacrobatics. And psychology and the psychophysiology really was, I think, for us a common touch point. So I would just love your opinion on that connection between psychology and breath,
Okay.
because
Well, like,
that's not a large question at all. And that's, easy to answer in a soundbite.
right. Well, when we look at psychophysiology, how does psychology play into it? We know that we as mammals have a lot of systems that are autonomic. We don't get to interact with them. But we also know that things like our heart rate and our breathing for humans, we can fiddle with that. And because we're humans, we do. we fiddle with it. You
Right.
know? But why? We fiddle with it when it serves us, when we feel like we're meeting a greater objective. And humans are really good at making this one really cool decision. It's, I am willing to suffer a little to make something happen if I get what I want. And when we attach behaviors to our breathing and we purposefully disrupt our pH, it doesn't feel good.
Hmm.
But whatever we're getting out of it must feel better because it overrides the cost benefit analysis
Right.
subconsciously,
Hmm.
right? So why do we do it? Because we're getting something out of it we need. Sometimes it's, I mean, I talk about this with artists and performers and athletes, is what do you give up physiologically to push yourself to the next level? And how much pain do you allow?
Hmm.
But I think we all do that. We all make compromises inside of ourselves and we don't recognize, because we've seen it modeled for generations,
Hmm.
we don't recognize that maybe we have an entwinement. It really is completely interlocked, that in an open, healthy breath, top thing that we need is the chemical access needs to be balanced. And then the next step is we have to have access to all of our breathing mechanics, a full range. And then the last step is we need to have breathing behaviors that align with the breathing chemistry and that are not attached to emotional processing, cognitive effort, or physical effort. If we attach our breathing to those three things, we run the risk of dysregulating ourselves and having one or more of the hundreds of symptoms of hypocapnia and the hundreds of disorders that we call them that really are a combination of symptoms
Hmm.
of hypocapnia.
That's a profound idea. When you start to think about breathing being connected to your emotions, your thoughts, all of these things, it can feel a little overwhelming to, well, then how do you get out of the way of all of that? I think it's something that it can feel really overwhelming. And you can get really curious about it and use that spirit of discovery and curiosity and exploration, which then it becomes fun and it becomes playful and it becomes joyful. I'll say we've been working together because we too have the little purple box of genius. And we as Sage and I have been unpacking our own breathing behavior. And so I just want to make sure that I offer that spirit of playfulness and discovery and curiosity really is at the heart of what we do with NeuroAcrobatics, but I know it's at the heart of what you do because I've worked with you. I know that that's how you approach it, which becomes very empowering as the person who's trying to unlock something that is as simple as breathing, but as nuanced as everything we've discussed.
Absolutely. That's such a good insight. And it really is. And I also, it's also part of, I think, an important piece of all types of breath work is that if they're not coming at it from a playful place, we're entrenching our nervous system in or compressing our nervous system instead of returning it to reflexes. Right.
Yes.
the fun part for me of working in breathing behavior analysis is that we aren't learning something new. It's not like trying to get big muscles, like to get back into the reflex. We're not doing that. We're going back to something your body already knows and wants. It's just waiting for us to get some stuff out of the way, right? So when we start playing with those edges and we go, oh, really? All I have to do is adjust my exhale? You mean my exhales could feel better? And
Right.
then we allow them to feel different and feel the difference between when we take over the exhale versus allow the exhale. And we might even play with like the tension at the beginning or the middle or the end and goof off with it. And then in our day to day, we might start to grow our awareness about how we've been managing ourselves, right? And once we recognize where we've been managing ourselves with our breathing, we can let it go. We get really good at recognizing and even breathing the wrong way on purpose, like so that it can be fun. Like, oh, look at me, I'm doing that thing again. And then let it go. Let it go.
Right. Well, and I love that. I think with all breath work, awareness really is at the heart of it. And I want to clarify how I'm using the term awareness because it is one of those words that gets thrown around in a lot of different ways. And so my default for awareness tends to come from, I think it was Tony Robbins who said that awareness creates choice. And I think that's one of my favorite things about the breath in general is just how much awareness there is once you start to realize, again, that psychophysiology component to the breath. You can tell a lot about yourself by simply observing your breath. When I'm breathing, how does that make me feel? Oh, breathing that way doesn't really make me feel great. Or the inverse of that. I'm not feeling as good as I did yesterday, earlier, whatever. How am I breathing? And is there something I could do to improve that? Once you start going down this road of breathing behavior and you start to see where you're stepping on your breath and getting in the way of it, you then have the power and the choice to begin to learn and make different choices that ideally, ultimately, are supporting respiration and your own physiology.
Yes. I think that's a really important piece when you bring it back to your previous question about what's the difference between breathing behavior analysis and other types of breath work, is that when you're doing breathing behavior analysis, we're creating awareness
Yeah.
to make change towards regaining our reflex. When we're using breathwork interventions, we're creating awareness that makes change to help us see how we feel when we're dysregulated. That's it. There's no, most breathing practices in and of themselves, if they don't come at it with an understanding of the psychophysiology and the need to return to reflexes, we're then exploring dysregulation and making meaning out of dysregulation. And then we have nowhere to put it back
Right.
into our physiology. What do we do with that? So this is, I think it's a path of completion for breath, which is why I train breathwork. I mean, I'm already a breathwork facilitator, but I also train breath workers now in breathing sciences for this reason, so that they can know that at the end of a therapeutic breathwork session or a series of interventions that they do, depending on what genre of breathwork they're involved in, are the people who are leaving, are they integrated, which is a buzzword in breathwork, right? Are they integrated? For me, integration means, is their CO2 back to normal?
Mm.
Do they have access to their entire physiology with good oxygenation, at least as good as when they arrived, when they leave? Because breathwork interventions can often get us trapped we grow these awarenesses and we think, oh, I should breathe like this all the time. And then we apply an intervention that we start using all the time. And it gets us trapped in behavioral cycles and we think we're doing a good thing. So being able to suss that out, how do you know if the breath work technique that you're using is helping you regain your reflexes or not?
That's a
So that's a,
great, yeah,
it's kind of the, I call it like sort of the Venn diagram where we roll it over is breathing sciences and breath work of all kinds, including historically, all have this one objective to help a person be the breath. How we interpret being the breath is where it changes.
right.
Being the breath is to allow it to be breathed with the intrinsic knowledge of our body, to trust our physiology. Can we trust our physiology?
Mm,
We still have the power to take it over if we need to in an emergency. That's why we have the ability to interrupt, right? But can we trust it enough to not do that in ways that it hurts us?
mm,
And that's where I think there's a lot of great conversation that could happen in all breathwork modalities around how to integrate this restoration of breathing mechanics coming after breathing chemistry,
mm,
right? Instead of focusing on the how do I move these muscles to get more oxygen in, it's how do I trust that my body already knows how to get all the oxygen in
mm,
without taking the process.
right. Well, I agree 100%. And I think today that's a good place to leave it. I
Yeah.
feel like we've discussed a lot and we have so much more to discuss. Because with every comment, I have 5 more questions. I think this is a good place to end because it feels complete. I just want to thank you so much. Before we go, how can people get a hold of you? And what are some projects that you have going on that might be interesting that you're excited about?
Aha. Well, people can find me at my new website, conspirehealth.ca. And we also have online presence on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. And there's a blog and a newsletter that you can sign up for to kind of keep track. My blog is where I say things I want to say, and my newsletter is where I comment on other people's research and things. So they're a little different in their focus because I want to keep them separate and balanced. And then some of my other projects right now, I'm working with the Professional School of Breathing Sciences. We're developing a CEU accredited course for breathing sciences for birth professionals. So doulas, midwives, delivering family doctors, obstetricians, labor and delivery nurses, childbirth educators. We want to talk to them about how hypocapnia affects pregnancy
Mm,
and affects labor and birth and the first trimester, the fourth trimester, which is the first 3 months after the baby's born,
mm,
to re-educate how some things that again have been normalized could be changed.
beautiful.
We have a lot more, pregnant women have a lot more power than they know they do over
Mm,
what we usually say is the suffering that's just associated with pregnancy. So there's my one big project. Another big project I'm working on is the Start Breathing Initiative with the University of Alberta. I'm working with athletes there, and specifically we're building a program through the sports psychology department.
ooh,
And
exciting.
yeah, so they've received some grants to start working on program delivery for breathing analysis for every athlete on campus. And I just came back from spending 3 days there and training the professors and the PhD students. And we just had a fabulous time. So watch for more information on that as I continue to give offerings for athletes. I do have webinars coming up just to introduce breathing sciences for athletes.
Right.
And then I also have introductory webinars for breath workers. If you want to know a
Wonderful.
little bit more, it's 4 hours, webinars for breathing sciences. And then if you want to take a deep dive and you want to really upgrade your breath work
Mm,
practices, I'm creating a new program. It's 500 hours. It's called Somatic Breath Therapy. And we're bringing in breathing sciences and layering it back through all the things that breath workers need to know with hands-on and experiential modules so that they really get to understand the work and then learn how to integrate it into their own practice.
That's amazing. I will
Yeah,
link all of that in the description below.
great.
Thank you so much. This has been such an amazing conversation and one that I've been wanting to have for a bit of time. So I'm excited for our next conversation. And I just want to say thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Megan. I'm really glad we finally got to this. I'm really looking forward to our probably many more conversations.
Yes. All right. This might become a new series. So stay tuned. All right. Thank you and bye bye.
Welcome. Bye-bye.